G'day, Filthbringers. I've forgotten what to do because it's been that long since. No, actually, I do know. It is ingrained in my heart and mind. But g'day, Filthbringers. It is AOS Coach, and we are in Generals Handbook 2023. And I am joined by one of my very first guests to talk about their faction, top tier, Lord of the Fly himself, Tom Oliver. And I'm going to do a little intro for Tom because Tom has been on my radar for a long time now. And he has been living rent-free in people's head for a long time. And you can feel anyone who's played against Tom has been scarred, not because he's a bad player. He's an amazing player, but he knows his faction incredibly well. And most recently, a couple of weeks ago, Tom went 5-0 with Nurgle. So I'm super curious to get under the surface to understand how Tom is thinking about Nurgle in the current General's Handbook. A couple of people in Discord have asked some questions, so we'll bring them in as well. And I do want to mention as well that while Tom is new to Age of Sigmar, has been playing for about 12 months now, has come from a competitive War Machine background. Who anyone who knows Tom Guan from the USA knows the pedigree that Tom is coming from. Although I am Tom, I'm a little disappointed in you. Before we get this into the discussion, I'm not mad. I'm disappointed that you were the master of the Troll Bloods, yet you've come to play not playing Gloomspite kits. So I just want you to know that I'm disappointed you're not playing Trolls in Age of Sigmar. But g'day, welcome. Introduce yourself other than my dodgy start.
Hi, I'm Tom. I mean, like Coach has said, I've been playing AOS for about 12 months now. After I've been playing man dollies for 22 years now. But took a bit of a break from GDUP for about 10, 12 years to go and play Warlords. And love that. And like Coach said, yes, I was a troll player, and no, I'm not a troll AOS player. As things changed in all things in life, and as that game changed, I just looked for a new opportunity. And it was actually something I was teetering on, was whether or not I would play AOS, and rocked up to Sydney GT last year, it was June-ish, May-ish?
Yeah, April.
April,
After 5 COVID stop restarts, it was we ended in April.
Yeah, and I hadn't touched the game at all at that point. I didn't have an army. I'd bought Gutrot Spume because I thought the model was really cool to paint up as a little experiment. And I just rocked up and saw what the competitive scene looked like, and not like in terms of quality of player or anything like that, but just in terms of what the community was like. And I was like, this is really cool. And Sydney's clearly got a very friendly, people that I now talk to all the time, would let me stay at the table for half an hour and answer questions while I was playing and stuff. And I was like, this is awesome. And just how I was like, how immersive this game is and how beautiful this game is. And it was sort of hook, line, and sinker from there. And sort of decided Nurgle after talking to Tom. Because coming to Age of Sigmar from another game, I was, I had a few little hang-ups about, certain mechanics. And one of them was coming from a game that was very certain as far as the way in which movement and decision-making was determined. You knew how far things were moving. And the idea of random charges was freaking me out. I was like, this game looks really fun, but I'm just going to roll that ones all the time. I'm going to hate life. So I was talking to Tommy and I was, my question was just I want a faction that just doesn't care about charging at all. And he was like, so what you should do is play this model called the Maggotkin, because it kind of doesn't care about charging. What it actually does is just charges every turn of the game, whether it's yours or not. And I was like, that sounds really, really fun, because and it's a very similar mechanic to a rule called countercharge in War Machine. So I was like, that sounds really fun. This is a really cool little control-y piece. And I jammed a couple of games, and a buddy let me borrow an army, and I was like, hook, line, and sinker. I was so into how sort of light the game is, how fun it is. It has the big moments that are really, really fun. And just been jamming the Nurgle. I've cheated on it a couple of times, more because I need hobby breaks, and as you can see, I'm painting some Seraphon in the background there, but mainly because of hobby breaks, and I've painted almost the whole faction in 12 months. But no matter what happens, I keep coming back to grandfather Nurgle.
And I must say, on behalf of the entire Sydney community, it's a crying shame that someone can do both 5 and O's and win Best Painted. So we'll get Tom's Twitter or X now. I don't know if you got an Instagram as well. I'll make sure to put it in the episode description. But your models are incredible. They certainly win awards as well. So it's not just my opinion. It's very, very, you're an incredible painter as well, which makes losing to you all the much nicer when you get tabled by a great player with a great looking army and who's just incredibly skilled. And it's fascinating that you mentioned some of the precision mechanics, because it was something that stood out for me when I talked to Tom Guan when he very first came over to Age of Sigmar. And I think he made a scene at maybe the LVO or one particular tournament and did incredibly well. I'd said to him, what's it like, pros and cons, what did you learn, and what are the things that, you took from War Machine? And I know one of the things that he talked a lot about was the precision mechanics and being able to, a lot of prediction, a lot of like the mathematical anticipation. So if people want to check that out, check it out. It's a really good discussion. And Tom is still terrorizing. I'm pretty sure I saw on Facebook this morning, he's 3-0 currently at a tournament with zombies. So great insight if you want to get into the weeds of that. But we're here to talk Nurgle. And one question that came from Discord is, first off, we got to set the scene. Who's your favorite Nurgling?
Oh,
and I hope you can see this. I hope you can see the screen at this point.
I was not ready for this, Coach. And this is sort of like choosing your children. Who's my favorite? Look,
it has to be sassy, right? It has to be sassy.
It has to be sassy. And I think Champion and Nurgtarian are like close. Like, they're lieutenant sort of cuteness department. But sassy Nurgling not only might be the best Nurgling, but it might be the best miniature of all time.
I need people in the comment section now to let me know what they're. Although I really like chill Nurgling, like that sings to me on this Sunday night. That chilled Nurgling sitting there. But like, there's so much character in Nurgle, and I think it's kind of like a nice segue because you've shared how you got into Nurgle. But for me, it's this absolutely fun mechanic. Where not just fun mechanic, there's a lot of character. You look at Sloppity Bilepiper, you look at some of the stories, whether it is the Beasts of Nurgle story and how they become Beasts of Nurgles. You listen to the the Magath Lords, the sister, the family, the three family, and how that all kind of come about. There's some really cool lore in Nurgle, which is I really enjoy. But let's talk General's Handbook. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was going to say absolutely, and then that's what drew me to the mortal side of the faction, especially from an aesthetic perspective. Is I'm yet to paint a duplicate model. Like, they're all individual. Like the Blight Kings, the Blight Lords, all that. So those guys, they're all character models, which is so engaging from an aesthetic standpoint and makes them so much fun to paint.
Yeah, there's a lot of detail, but it's fun detail, and there's a lot of things you can do, and you can paint them really clean. You can paint them with biles and pus, and you can do goop and different things to kind of show that disgusting side. Or you go into what you see on Facebook is that one particular photo that does the rounds every 6 to 12 months, where someone's done a great unclean one in flesh, and that is horrific. That is absolutely terrifying. It's filthy,
awful.
So
it's up there in disturbing miniatures with what was it, Kragnos with Gargant feet. Like in terms of things that people should never have done with plastic miniatures, those are two things that should have never happened.
Though I did recently see some evocators on Dracolines, and the person had put squig heads on the Dracoline heads, and it looks incredible. So keep bashing.
Like
yeah. I mean, everything's better with squigs. All right, we're going down the Gits path again. See, the troll blood live in you. The troll blood lives in you. We'll get it out one day.
I'm yet to pick a destruction faction, so it could very well happen.
Let's talk General's Handbook first. Let's talk season 2023. We're in the world of Antorian locusts, yada, yada, yada. I'm going to get the rules up shortly, and we'll talk a bit more about how it relates to Nurgle. But just overall, how do you feel currently with the General's Handbook 2023, Nurgle as a faction, and how it kind of sits in the world? Because everyone's talking Slaanesh, they're talking OBR, Soulblight, they're talking Seraphon, they're talking, the top 5, and poor old Nurgle's not getting a lot of love, at least from the airwaves.
Yeah, and we now have hard data that proves just how not good they are, which is a bottom 3 result on G-Dubs. Little metric they just put out. No, I think Nurgle's in a really interesting place. There have been a few things that have come out in, like, let's say the last 6 months that have been really, really impactful for the faction. And as well, I think they're one of the more versatile factions you can play within the game. I think that they reward really thoughtful engagement with list writing, and they have really, really good capacity to tech for some of the boogeymen that are lying around. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to silver bullet the whole world. That doesn't mean that you're going to be able to write a list and probably rock up comfortably and just positive win rate or what have you. Like, I think that they're certainly with some deficits at the moment, but there's a huge capacity, especially in the hands of someone who wants to stick with them for a while, to really emphasize play, like expression of play. They're and a really good example is the differences between the two lists that I brought up, that I've sent you, that we'll talk about later on, which is that they have because they're not just like a straight damage dealing army, and they're not just a straight armor skew army. They're a survival army, and we'll break down how that works at some point, I'm sure. But it means that they sort of can flip around what they want to do, whether it be a high aggro army, whether it be a bit of a shooting dominant army, whether it be a magic based army. But they're not going to be doing any of those things, I think, in the same way that you're going to be seeing those top performers do. And as a result, the tech that you bring with them, the way that you engage with them, can really be an interesting way to engage with some of those problems. So they're at the moment, if we go back 12 months, I'd say that you're running top of the meta with Nurgle. Like there was a lot that wasn't answering it very well, but now I think that they're at a point where in the hands of somebody who's willing to put the time and effort in with them, they're really good for the problem solving part of the game. And if you're wanting to sort of play like quote unquote off meta and be a narrative chestnut player with flies, for example, you might want to engage with the flies, but you can really think about I think of those top 5 factions, like your Khorne, your Slaanesh, your KO, your ODR, and probably your Gits. And I think that Nurgle's a faction that can have a really good game into any of them if thought about correctly.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that as well. Like I agree with you with a lot of things you said. If you think about Nurgle and the tricks that it has up their sleeve, you've got the counter charge in your opponent's charge phase. You can stop people doing pile-ins. You've got the chip damage from the diseased weapons. You've got a lot of healing, a lot of wards. You obviously have the flies and being able to do some guarantees up front. There's a lot of little tricks where you're right. It's not like Soul Black Gravelords where you've either got a zombie build through Veercross or you're going to have Ethereal Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon. Well, until lately, until Merciless Blizzard came along, and it kind of feels like they're retreating from that strategy. But there's very little Nurgle lists that look the same. And it's interesting when I look at the data and I look at how people are performing, it seems like a lot of people are trying to work through what does a really good 3rd edition, this particular Generals Handbook Nurgle list look like, because you've got a lot of tools. And as I'll talk about in a minute, when I bring up the stats as well, you've had a bunch of points discounts as well. So things that weren't attractive are now kind of like, oh, okay, maybe it's worth revisiting, or something that's got a points increase where it's like, I relied on that too much. Maybe I need to pull back. So I'll get your take on that very, very soon. But is it the time for given that we're in Antorian Locuses, and I'll bring up the screen now, is it now time for the Filthbringers and the Rotbringer Coven? Because when I think about Antorian Locus and Power Dice and Merciless Blizzard, if I'm thinking about these sub-commander wizards with less than 10 wounds, I think of Rotbringer Coven. I think of those 3 wizards that you can bring onto the table. Obviously in Nurgle, like I can bring 65-point wizards in my Gits and have a field day. But for you, is this the time that the Filthbringers are going to rise to power?
I think that this is the best time that you've ever had to play Rotbringer, and it might be the worst time you've ever had to play Rotbringers. And I think that particular example, like I've only just started tooling around with it, just because it's taken me a while to build up what I've actually got. But I have plans to play a lot of Rotbringers in the next, like a lot of Filthbringers in the next little while. I've had a few practice games with them, and the list with just the three, like the three wizards, and what we'll see a little bit later on, is just so fun. Like it's a really cool, and again leans into the teching side of the faction, which is that like castings that are premium at the moment, and I don't think you could look at Filthbringers as a magic dominant army. Like you'll be able to eke out one probably hopefully reliable cast per turn, which means in a world where you've got these really big spells that exist, you can make the most of that, and you can start ramping up the volume of casting really well, which is that's the sort of I would actually argue the minor side of the benefit of that subfaction. Where it's really powerful is being able to have almost certainty, like nothing certain in Warhammer, but almost certainty that you will be able to have a really high capacity to shut down pivotal spell casting in your opponent's list. And again, it's where Nurgle sort of leans into that counterplay faction identity. Is that just being able to, and that not being tied to a single model, makes that particular little sub-faction extremely versatile. And then we start talking about, that Nurgle has one of the best spells in the game in Rancid Visitations, and B, they've now got the best spell in the game in Merciless Blizzard, and C, their endless spells are really efficient in terms of not just being an endless spell, but also being a disease spreader. So all those things combined, I think that this is probably the most open you've seen Nurgle thus far, and it's because you've got your traditional builds and your Glotkings, your Flies, your Black King sort of builds, and your Magathord builds. You got your Rotbringer, your Filthbringer list, and then the other side of it, which I'm yet to really explore, and thankfully I've still got 11 months to do so, is that I think demons might have a bit more play now with the Andorian Locust rules as well, because they don't get talked about it much. And I think there's a reason why, because I just don't think they're at the same level as where some of the rest of the faction is. And that comes down to movement. But, things like the Beast of Nurgle being dropped and being poisoned, Nurglings coming down into that really comfortable 100-point range means you can start to build volume of things that are kind of quick, and then you can start building in cool wizards on top of that. So I think this edition, despite the fact that Nurgle's not like a Seraphon or a Tzeentch or a Lumineth, are going to be a really cool army to play within the bounds of these rules, because they're just really flexible in how they use them.
Yeah, and while we're talking stats, I might actually bring up this particular reference point. Now, this is not the only data source out there. So, for example, let's talk about the Games Workshop one, and I talk about this mostly because of the visibility. Like you've got Warhammer, who do incredible stats, TSN do incredible stats, and they all tell different stories because they look at their data differently. I think TSN only looks at 2 days, 2-day events.
Yeah.
Warhammer looks at certain things. Games Workshop looks at certain things. But given that Games Workshop has a much greater reach across the entire game, you look at Nurgle sitting at the bottom there with Cities of Sigmar and Stormcast. And, Cities is an interesting one because probably not a lot of people are taking it because they know the new rules are coming. Stormcast being an army that is very good for new players. So you probably see a lot of win rates kind of dropping there. But also, Tom, we played a couple of months ago with Stormcast Eternals, and I didn't find that I had the gas when it came to playing with some of the top tier armies. But Nurgle's an interesting one when I looked at that, and for comparison, when I looked at Warhammer's data, Warhammer had Nurgle sitting at the middle of the pack. Nurgle was middle. Lots of 3-2s or 2-3s, very few kind of 4-1s, and even less 5-0s for Nurgle. But what's your take on the win percentage? You talked a little bit more about the top tier armies, and like what does this mean to you? Because you've taken them to a 5-0, and you've obviously stuck with them for 12 months. So, like, what's your take on that number?
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a range of factors at play here. One of the big ones is that Nurgle is a weird thing in that it's got a very loyal fan base as a faction. You and I play against some people who are like wildly loyal to Nurgle. And I think that you're seeing those people hang around. And I think that we're past the point of Nurgle being a hotness faction. Because it's, I mean, if you think about it, it only came out in December, January of last year, but it's already the 4th oldest book in the game. And like, there's only Flesh Eater Courts, Stormcast, and Orcs that are older. And so if we don't count cities, because it's about, we've already seen what that book looks like. So you factor in those things. So I think that you will still see it represented, but I think you're seeing it represented by people who are really passionate about the faction. And that's not to say that they're not good players or anything like that, but it's going to have a smaller, maybe it's potentially a smaller representation. And as a result, it's probably just suffering in those areas. I don't think the last GHB was particularly good for Nurgle, because it's Galician champions, whatever champions.
It was the champions.
Were pretty painful to try and fit into lists and into established builds. And I think that in terms of building lists for Nurgle, they're very concept driven in terms of, like, you want to think about, like, I'm running an aggro list, and so I'm going to put pieces in that run very aggressively, or I'm building into a sort of that Dirtle mid-board control the army, and I'm going to put units into that work into that. So it was really hard. It was kind of awkward to sort of push those GHB pieces into lists. So you got that at play, and then you take into consideration that a bunch of new things have come out, and I think that being a little bit older, maybe having that lower representation, it's taking people a little bit to figure out how to quote unquote tech for things that have been released. So and stuff that has come out, I think, has been not great for Nurgle. Whether it be, like, I think the KO book was a really tough jam. I think OBR could be a fairly tough jam unless you bring specific pieces. Slaanesh is absolutely a really, really tricky game for Nurgle to play. So as you see the rise of those, I think it's sort of the meta, the macro of the game is sort of working against it. I think that, I mean, but at the same time, if we're looking at the variance in the stats here, even if we take the GW stats at 44% being where it sits, it's only 4% deviated from that midpoint, which is like your Beast of Chaos, Ironjaws, and there's a lot sitting at 48%. So I don't think sky's falling by any stretch of the imagination. It's very interesting to see what GW had to say about where Nurgle was at, in terms of, like, they're now actively looking to buff them. And I think that you've also seen a few choices made in the last updates that are probably going to have sent people to a bit of soul searching for a minute. So, and a really good example of that, whilst we had the Flies come down, whilst we had Glock-King come down quite a lot in that packet, we also saw Rot My Creed go up by 25 points. And they were a unit you could just, like, jam into, like, in volume into lists. And now you have to be really purposeful about including them, because 150 versus 125 are very different point brackets to be playing in, and that's a huge change. And I think that's quite impactful. And I think that Blight King's not coming down as well. Not that I'm saying that they need to, but I think there was a lot of expectation that they would. I think that means that people aren't going to touch them as well, because I think, especially Glock King coming down, the Glock King, Blight King, the Foot Boys and the Glock King combination is so cool. Like, that's what I started playing the game out with, and we'll probably try and jam that again at some point really soon as well. So people might have their established lists at this point. I think looking around at, say, Slaughter, our local events, Bathurst, I think we've got people, I'm seeing people sort of, they're settling into their routine of, like, this is what I like to play in Nurgle, and I'm going to play that. And that might, that might be, it's sometimes a limiting factor as far as, like, success. But I also don't see anybody having a terrible time using Nurgle. Like, whichever way you want to cut it, Nurgle players are always having a good time. So, it's a range of factors. But as opposed to something else like Stormcast, and I'd say that that's an interesting comparison point that you brought up, where you felt like they were sort of running out of gas. And I think I've had that conversation with a couple of people at this point. I don't think I'm having the same conversation with Nurgle. Like, especially this GHB, I think they can easily secure 5 tactics. I think they can stand in circles. Their output's never been that good. So you have to build into output if you want output. Otherwise, you're playing the control game or you're playing the versatile game. But I think that their ability to play the game is still really, really high.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think they're definitely not top tier. Like if I'm building a list, I'm not freaking out thinking, how do I handle Nurgle? Definitely I want to consider a strategy, but certainly obviously you saw the win rates there, whether it is, Corn, OBR, yada yada yada. You can read the article. There's certain armies that are kind of terrorizing the meta right now. And I think, to your point, I do have a weird theory as well. And I don't want to go too into this because we'll probably spend 10 years on it. But you see sometimes at a tournament, especially where people are struggling to get through like round 4. And I wonder, being that Nurgle is a game that's rewarded from like turn 4 to turn 5, I wonder if you can speed up your games and get to the full 5. Do you see the win percentages go up? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. I'd be curious to hear from people. Are you finishing your full 5 turns at a tournament? Because I think you do see some armies, some grindy armies. It can be a real struggle to get those 5. And yeah.
And that actually, that changed. That was the reason for the change of my list between Sydney Slaughter, where I played the slower list. Like it was like a couple of Magath Lords, a unit of flies, and 20 Rotmire Creed and some other things. And it was very sort of mid-board, like let's just grind it out sort of thing. And I had a game at the start of day 2 after having played 3 games that all went to sort of the very end of the round the day before. And my 4th game did exactly that, and I was like, man, I'm actually fatigued, like, and pushing through the end of that game, which is where I dropped a game in that event. But I was very cognizant that, like, pace of Nurgle can be really slow. Like in the same way that I'm seeing Soulblight players have the exact same problem, dirtling as a faction identity. So, and not in terms of like doing nothing, but just sort of sitting there and grinding is a really, really taxing way to play the game.
And like to Bathurst, I know I want to get to the rules in a second.
Yeah, all good.
But at Bathurst no, that's on me. But like at Bathurst, I played Gits and I played, like I had a bunch of Goblin idiots. I brought them, but I ran up against 2 Soulblight factions as well, and they have a lot of grind, and they're bringing things back from the gravesite, and that all takes time, and you start adding that up, and sometimes you're really pushing to get to the full 5. So just for food for thought, and I think just on yourself, how do you speed up your game? How do you make sure that you get to the 5? And because the faction identity does slow you down a little, but what doesn't slow me down is these Antorian locuses, because they have some cool rules. High level thoughts. We talked a little bit about the Filthbringers and getting some good stuff. So I think you and I probably both agree that Filthbringers isn't the auto include. Everyone doesn't need to drop their build of Drowned Men or Blessed Sons to run Filthbringers, but it obviously has some good rules to play with. Regardless, against Nurgle, you've got some wizards. Where do you land on these Antorian locuses? Are you someone who is looking to add as many as possible? Do you always take at least one of these Antorian locuses to tap into a certain list, a certain spell? Do you think the spells are just okay for Nurgle and doesn't actually add a lot of benefits? Like where are you at? And what advice would you give to me if I was building a Nurgle list?
Yeah, really, really good question. I think it's an all or nothing conversation as far as the Andorian locusts are concerned, like little wizards. I think you can splash a wizard in and not be punished too hard. Cheap factions. So, those sorcerers are 140-ish points, 150-ish points, which is significant. Like that's a for something that, for a faction that doesn't have a lot of high need for building pieces around like synergy layering, especially when we're talking the mortal side of the faction. What makes them good is that things are independent operators. The Rotbringer Sorcerer, as the example here, is a really, really good piece. But if it's not gelling with the rest of the list, you can be a little bit sacrificing efficiency for cool things. And as a result, like I've sort of got to a point where I'm building lists where they have the Filthbringers, and or I'm taking something like a Bellicor or a Blowab instead, which is something that gives me synergy or gives me independent threat pieces as well as being a wizard, because the really important part of the Andorian rules comes from the Primal Dice. And so which is where I would say, unless you're building specifically for it, what you're bringing Magic to a Nurgle list for 9 times out of 10 is unbinding, and using, saving your Primal Dice up 9 times out of 10 for unbinds. Whereas if I go to the Filthbringers list, you start getting into rampant levels of casting, like 3, 4, 5 spells in a turn, and they're all pretty devastating. But there are 3 spells that Nurgle can play that comfortably remove half to all of a unit. So then we're starting to enter a conversation of like, it's not a counterspell rule, it's a casting rule. And so like I've landed like someone like Bellicor I really love in lists, because you got Dark Master, and that's a really, really powerful rule. But outside of that, he can run the job of like, he's a bit scary in melee, but he's a 2-cast wizard, and that's really, really, really important. Is that you brought this cool piece who can actually spend a lot of the game just playing the denial. Blowab has a similar role. He's only a 1-cast, but he has a casting debuff attached to him. And so those 2 pieces are really, really synergistic in terms of like, I want to build an output army. I want to build an army that has these independent operators. I'm not needing to go and grab a 150-point wizard who might limit me from taking other things in my list. And then I could play 3 wizards plus any other wizards I want to bring, and really start leaning into these Andorian Locust rules with the extra cast, with the Primal Dice, with the Blizzard, the Blizzard Wizards, and all that jazz. So it's an interesting place to be in terms of like, they have way more than one way to handle this rule and handle it really well.
So what I'm hearing, if I just summarize, is I'm hearing Andorian Locust, which is our small heroes. You can, and also don't have to run it. Obviously, that's up to your selection. And obviously, you've got some great spell options too. So you don't need to go into Blizzard or Hoarfrost or Rupture if you don't want to take those particular spells. You do have some good spells. And I probably found in my Gits army, I was running out of a lot of offensive spells outside of like Blizzard. There's only a couple. So for me, like building a strategy around offense, especially some of the stuff like, killing one of the battle tactics where you got to kill a unit with offensive spells. This is great for you. For me, it's a bit hard. So what I'm hearing is that Andorian Locust, you don't have to take. Obviously, you can, and there's some cool stuff you can do. We'll talk about this later. But really, what you're thinking about is a Primal Magic Dice, and from what I'm hearing is it's a great unbind ability. And I'm finding that I am also putting a lot of my Primal Dice into unbinds. And through, and like I mentioned Filthbringers because it plays similarly to a faction that I ran at Bathurst called Bad Snatchers, where if you got 2 wizards kind of together, they can re-roll one of their casting dice, which is great because it means I get a bit more consistency with my spell casting, and I can put my power dice into defense. And the same is true for you. But in this case, they get a +1, a +2 for casting, unbinding, and dispelling, which is great when you're starting to see more endless spells on the table. You are seeing more armies build around magic. And even if you play against an army that doesn't play a lot of magic, you can use your Primal Dice to cast as opposed to unbind. So a lot of things to think about, especially as you build your Nurgle. Anything else you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think that there's one other really big consideration for Nurgle, which is as far as to take Filthbringers or not take Filthbringers, is that subfactions in Nurgle matter a lot because they're how you unlock battle line, and the base battle line options in action are not usually what you want to be running. It's why a lot of Afflictions is so good, because it unlocks flies for you as battle line. But outside of that, you have to go to other subfactions to create battle line that's not Blight Kings or Plague Bearers. So you need to really want to lean into things like Filthbringers, the wizard side of it, to play it, because otherwise your list can get quite awkward in the process.
Yeah. Cool. No, that sounds good. And I'm only talking Filthbringers, folks, because it's the season of wizards, and the Filthbringers sub faction is definitely built around that particular piece. Getting +3, like there's some crazy things within Filthbringers, but you're definitely going in for an all or nothing strategy. You probably want to get some endless spells. You're going to be going into a magic heavy army, and maybe you'll find you won't have the tools to go against like the Khorns of the world. So just keep that in mind before you go too hard on a Filthbringers, but you've definitely still got play around, your Drowned Men, your Blessed Sons. You probably don't see much of the Befouling Host or the Droning Guard, but you do you. Build the list that makes you happy. But I'm hearing there's a lot of cool stuff with Wizard, and yeah, I'm loving this Primal Magic dice. It's absolutely insanity.
I was worried when they said Wizard season, and I was like, oh, here we go. Like, this is going to be Seraphon and Zinch the whole way through, because all it's going to be is kill stuff with spells and kill wizards. And it's that they've actually seemed to have balanced the idea of like, let's bring really cool rules in for wizards, but not make the scoring system about wizards. So that was a really cool twist.
Really quickly, 'cause I think some of these things we can just go over quickly because we don't need to read these out. So in the General's Handbook, you do get 4 different command traits. So if your general is an Antorian Locus, let's say it's your Rotbringer Sorcerer, if you make them the general, you can choose one of these 4. Do any of these stand out to you as something that you would build around, or do you think inherently in Nurgle you've got better command choices to choose from, or you just don't want an Antorian Locus as your general in your faction?
Yeah, it's that's a really interesting one. I think that Shaman of the Chill Lands, I think a lot of people are playing Shaman of the Chill Lands, because knowing all 3 of those spells, or mainly 2 of those spells, is huge. So I'd say that one is quite attractive, especially if you're running, you're not running a hero that would take on probably one of the best command abilities in the game, which is Overpowering Stench. So I could see a world where you are taking Shaman of the Chill Lands. However, most of the time you are going to want to take a tanky general, like you're taking a foot hero or a mounted hero, and you're throwing Overpowering Stench on them, and you're just shutting down commands left and right. And that one rule is, I think, what keeps Nurgle so relevant all the time, is that the second you see these top factions or just common factions relying on command abilities, you lean towards that. But that doesn't mean you have to take it. And I think that Shaman of Chill Lands is phenomenal. I think that knowing all 3 of those is really important. And I quite like Eater of Magic as well. And this is where, if you're a spiteful person and you really, really knew that you were playing against a lot of wizards in your local, you take Eater of Magic and you start making people forget. You make Croak forget his nuke spell and make your opponent sad, and that's great. So like there's play here, and again, it's where I come back to the point that I think that Nurgle's very, very good at teching. So those 2 would be where I'd lean to. I'm not that keen on Chill to the Bone, and I'm not that keen on Eye of the Blizzard.
I don't mind Chill to the Bone, just because if you're going to be leveraging Merciless Blizzard and you're freaking out about a miscast, especially like, here's a perfect example, right? I played Khorn at Bathurst GT, and Khorn, if you miscast, especially in the range of the Skull Altar, you're going to do even more mortal wounds to yourself. I think it's D6 +3. So that'll pop your general immediately. So if you're going to be going offensive and you have the ability on a 2 out of 3 chance to ignore that first miscast, I actually don't hate that. But to your original point, would I rather that or Grandfather's Blessing to be able to manipulate the wheel a little better, or Overpowering Stench? I think the answer is Overpowering Stench over any of these. But it's not to say that any of these are wrong, folks. If you really want to build around it, amazing. But I think for me, and I'm not a Nurgle player, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think I look at your battle tome choices, and they're just superior.
Yeah, I'd agree. And just one last one on Judge to the Bone. I think it's good. But if you're taking the Antorian Locus general, there's a really weird interaction here, which is that you're probably playing a Filthbringer list, and in that the 3 wizards are sharing a buff. So your 3+ can move around that little trio. And so when you roll that Merciless Blizzard and you miscast or what have you, which might not be your general, you don't get the full effect of that spell. So it's a weird little counter synergy that could exist there and make it a little bit like if I was playing like a list that had like a really good like single guy that was casting, that would be way more attractive to me.
Yeah, no, good call. Yeah. Or you know what, if your guys are hugging each other and you don't want them to all blow up at the same time, if it's independent, you don't have to worry about it. But when you're if you're hanging out, you don't want all three of them to pop because they will. But I think the point's been made. Like they're okay, but there's nothing auto include for you as a Nurgle piece. But what is starting to be a little bit auto include is at least two of these threes. Two of these three spells are becoming very popular, not just at our local scene, but across the board. People are talking and raving about these spells. That is Hoarfrost, Merciless Blizzard, and Rupture. Do you see all three of these being great choices for Nurgle? Let's just start at the high level. Where are you at with these three spells, and do they overtake any of the good spells in your list? And you've got a lot of really good spells in Nurgle.
No, so there's two or three that I think are good for Nurgle. I think Rupture leans into Old Mate Cronspine, and that's a combo that we're seeing, and at least until this spell is fixed. If it is going to get fixed, which is to not be able to make your own Cronspine wild. But Nurgle doesn't run that piece, and or you can, but it's a really expensive piece in a faction that's already really expensive. So I don't see that one being played a lot. However, the other two are really game changing for Nurgle. In that Merciless Blizzard, I'll talk to that one because I think that's really easy to see why. In that Nurgle can have a bit of a problem in just one rounding a really big thing. So a really good example is, and this is sort of a litmus test that I have for output of a list when I think of one, is how do I deal with a Gargant list? And they whichever way you want to look at it, Gargants are probably one of the best. Sons of Behemoth are probably one of the best indicators of a gear check in the game in terms of you can either kill these guys or you can't, and you either have to control them or you have to figure out another way to deal with them. And so Merciless Blizzard is a really big enabler of something like that. It's not just for, sucked in idiot, I killed your zombie dragon. It's actually part of a bigger concept in the faction, which is, can you push that out? And similarly, I think that Merciless Blizzard has changed, it fundamentally changes the game until it's gone or changed. And either one of those things will happen at some point in the next 12 months. The edition will run out or they'll change how it works. But it existing and it's clearly popular and it's clearly very powerful. It fundamentally changes the potential tempo for a game to be played. So, I know a lot of people are unhappy with this spell in the same way that they were unhappy with something like Purple Sun when it could auto kill anything in the game. The fact that this could drop, somebody like an Archeon or pretty much, or in one swing, there's the potential for that, means that you're playing in a world where your big thing can be taken out really, really fast from range with magic, as opposed to let's chip through with lots of D3s, which is what you normally see in wizard in spell damage. Because that happens, that changes the pace at which trading can happen. So until this goes away, you need to think, well, this is a real potential. I will lose that thing, and I need to be able to then swing the game back. How do you do that? Well, you bring a monster to fight a monster. You take Merciless Blizzard to sort of keep up with the exchange rate in a game, the trading rate in a game, which is that if they can take it out, I need to be able to take it out. So for those two things, I think that Merciless Blizzard is really actually quite good and important for Nurgle. Where it's probably not great is that I don't think the wombo combo of Portal, because you can't do it, but it's a really good example of if you're going to build this magical damage output thing, it's about building a magical fortress. It's about a castle sort of play, and you're now trying to lure people in and just really counterpunch through. So Merciless Blizzard are really important and really cool, at least until it's gone, and it's good in Nurgle as long as it's in the game, sort of thing.
Can I pause you before you go to Hoarfrost, because I want to talk about the difference between you and I on the competitive scene. So I play Gits, right? Who knew? At at tournaments, what I'm able to do is I think the difference between you and I is I have the delivery mechanism. I have a 65 to 70 point wizard that I can put on Merciless Blizzard, and I can throw it out at an opponent and don't care if it dies or not. It's a 70 point idiot. In addition, I've got things like Hand of Gork, or if I was a Skaven player, I've got my Narholes, or, there are some armies that have teleporting shenanigans with cheap wizards, and the risk to reward ability is very, very low. If it fails Merciless Blizzard and dies, it's 70 points, don't care. But for you, you're paying 150 points for that sorcerer, where it's a much harder trade-off, and you don't have the teleport to deliver it within 12. I can teleport just outside of 9, which gives me a perfect way to then delete you with Merciless Blizzard. So I think that's like one consideration. And if you are looking at Merciless Blizzard, you've probably got 1, maybe 2 chances at best. And how you get that wizard within 12 of what you want to delete is probably the challenge you need to think about, and how you consider it. And I think that's the difference between like Skaven and Gits versus probably most factions with Merciless Blizzard.
It's a really good point. And it's where I think those two types of factions are going to have to fundamentally think differently about how they use that. So for the web spinner shaman with the teleport pew pew, like you if you have the ability to take that, you take that in every bloody list. Like, it is wonderful. Whereas in let's compare that with Nurgle, it's where you turn a 140 point wizard into your late game closer. Or your 360 point little coven into a late game closer. Like, they're waiting to mop up at sort of the late stages of trading with that spell. But you're right, you're only going to get 1, maybe 2 chances of casting that in faction. So that's like sort of how that changes tempo. But then if we look at Hoarfrost, I think that's beautiful. Like, it's the first time that Nurgle has a real synergistic spell. In terms of, like, you got the one that makes your disease happen on 5s, not 6s. And that's okay. Like, it's fine. But it's not often, quote unquote, the electrolytes that plants crave. It's playing into a faction that already has really high volume of attacks. Like, getting to 7 disease points is usually pretty manageable. And that's not necessarily a really important thing. Like, it's not worth giving up a cast of something that's really cool. Like a Rancid, like a Hoarfrost, or whatever it is. Hoarfrost, on the other hand, is so it's ubiquitously strong across faction. It's the only real way to get rend into the faction. Like, Nurgle is built on an identity of the attack profile of 4s and 3s, or 3s and 3s, rend 1 to nothing, 1 damage. So cutting through armor can be something that is tough at times. So Hoarfrost is, it's a chef's kiss. Like, it is that synergy that Nurgle was really looking for. It's that everybody was looking for, but I think that it's really, really good in that front.
Is there any particular units, and obviously this is going to change for everyone, right? But is there a particular unit or units that maybe benefit the most from Hoarfrost? That maybe, like, I'm always going to chuck this on my Guo. I'm always going to put this onto X. Like,
it's going to go onto so many units in Nurgle. And the big there's not a bad unit to put it on, especially when we talk like squad wise, because one of the things that Nurgle tends to wind up having is volume of attacks in melee. So the really, really powerful one is going to be something like Blight Lords, because each guy's making 11 attacks and pumping them to, and turning them into the 6 bug attacks into Rend 2 or 3 is a huge swing on how that the dice math works. Then you keep your Rend 1 attacks as they are. They're wonderful. And then you turn this second set of attacks, which have been okay, into the better attacks. You're cheering. But then we talk about, Blight Kings and them picking up Rend 2 or 3, again, 25 attacks from a pot of 5. Even the difference that it makes to something like Rotmire Creed. And we talk about Rotmire Creed as a shooting unit all the time, but their attack profile is identical in melee as it is at ranged. 4s and 3s, rend nothing, 1 damage. So you're probably going to play them in a larger block, so you're getting up to 40 attacks out of that unit, and you're probably going to all-out attack them because that's what you do to large blocks of units. So they're hitting on 3s, they're winning on 3s, and then you add any form of rend to that, and you've turned them from like this okay unit. Like they're very versatile into this really, 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 really powerful unit. And that's a game changer. Like that's a big game changer. And the same theory applies to Nurglings, to Plague Bearers, to Plague Drones. Any of those units, probably for the same reasons as the Rotmai Kree, it changes what those units are capable of.
Yeah, Black Kings were the first thing that came to my mind because they do a lot of attacks and they're obviously looking for the disease tokens. But being able to get those Rend, for example, or bringing down some of the profile to get more of those disease tokens out, um, great. And I think probably one of the challenges you're going to have with, let's say, your flies is you got to be within 12-inch range. And I found even with my gits in the last tournament, it is hard to stay within 12, especially. And I don't have the speed nearly as much as you do. Like me trying to keep up with my squigs was really tough with this. But like your Black Kings, walking up the board, having that wizard keeping within 12, great delivery mechanism to your point. The Rotmai Kree, you probably could touch this on the Plague Bearers. Like there's so many great options, I think. But Hoarfrost for me, out of the 3 spells, obviously Merciless Blizzard is the damage dealer, but Hoarfrost is the consistency I've been craving. And I've been playing with it on my Sons of Behemat. Like I brought a mercenary Mega Gargant into my Gits faction, and being able to bring the attack profile on a Gatebreaker down to 2s just fundamentally changed the output of the War Scroll. And I imagine in your faction what you could be tapping into and where you can get some really good value.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a spell that I think could possibly just stay in the game long term. It's really it's a nice way to quote unquote turd polish, and I'm a big fan of having that in games always.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I'm sure we'll start seeing some ways people break the game, but Hoarfrost is just overall seems to be a popular spell choice, and surprised to nobody. You guys are loving it as well. Probably not going to talk about this a lot because I rarely see a Nurgle list that doesn't have a wizard of some description, whether it is a big wizard that might not be an Antorian Locust. There's always a wizard. I can't see you just doing priests, or no wizards. Do you see a world where you've got no wizards? And if you did, would you be just going the Pouch of Null Dust or like?
Yeah, I think Pouch of Null Dust is a really cool artifact. I think it's really good. I think the Nullstone Pebble's pretty good. But I just don't think you're going to see them in Nurgle.
Yeah, I didn't want to talk too much because I just see every list has a wizard of some description, and it feels like there's no point talking about it. You're always taking a wizard. You got good spells. A lot of your characters are wizards. Just move along. But one thing I did want to talk to you about, because I did look at your list, and we will share the lists, in the near future. I swear, I promise. It's not like a wait till the end. It's not like a Marvel end credit, so you finally get it. But something I really enjoyed was the Antorian Acolytes, because I got an extra Primal Dice if I roll a 3+ in a hero phase. And that got me thinking with this Filthbringer discussion. And again, not everyone's playing Filthbringers. I get it. But here I am, taking the Rotbringer Coven. I've got 3 wizards. They're all Antorian Locusts. I've got a battalion here that is for 3 wizards. And if I take them, I get an extra power dice. I could be taking 2 extra power dice a turn if I roll the 3+. And for me at the latest tournament, the power discrepancy between me and my opponent, where I was getting 1 to 2 extra power dice in a full turn, was ridiculous. Like a whole battle round where, they didn't get 1. I score my 3+, and I've got a 1-0 lead over you. Being able to have that extra dice to shut down your Merciless Blizzard or your Hoarfrost or that critical spell. Like I will never leave home without Antorian Acolytes if I have the choice. So I want to pass it over to you. Where do you stand with this particular battalion, whether you're Filthbringers or not? Even if you're not Filthbringers, do you like this? Or would you?
It's a serious consideration. It's so powerful. The Fieldbringers list that we'll look at later on, I've played it a bit, and that's the next consideration. That's the next stage, is to test it where, and I'm like not a particularly intelligent person in that I think that I just go, how do I get to 1 drop or as lower drop as I can get and move on, because I have to think too much otherwise. But I think that abandoning drops, especially with wizard builds, to get Entorian Locus acolytes is super, super powerful. And I think that there's two battalions that are really dragging me away from Battle Reg now, which is that one and Command Entourage. And that's just off the back of I realized, I didn't figure it out, but I just realized that you can get the extra spell cast on every wizard in a list with that Magnificent. And I really think I'm gonna start playing in a world where I take Command Entourage and Acolytes and then figure out what to do with the rest of the list, rather than how do I get my Battle Reg and a little bits extra. Because you do that, if you get an extra 2 Primal Dice over the course of battle round that your opponent's not, and like I said, it goes back into that unbind more than the cast. You're denying. You're just playing deny. And that is going to be super, super strong.
It was a deal. It made a huge difference. There was plenty of times where my opponent and I both failed to roll the 4 up to get the Primal Dice, but then I would roll a 3 up subsequently and get myself a Primal Dice. So just having that 1 up my sleeve, and if I went second in the battle round, I could save it. Then I could go for Merciless Blizzard and potentially get 1 or 2. There were some times where I had 4 Primal Dice when I was going second, and I like, well, cool, I want to do Blizzard. Oh, I got a particular spell. I could just spend all of the points as long as I didn't roll those double ones. It was a big difference maker with Entorian Locus. So, but the challenge for you is you've got your battle reg, and given Nurgle likes to control, you're giving up your 1-drop. If you're going to take Entorian Locus, that's at least 2 heroes, and then to fulfill Warlord or Battle Reg, you're going to need a bunch of other heroes, and that your heroes are super expensive again compared to my 70-point wizards. So it's an interesting trade-off for you.
Yeah, and you can that's you hit the nail on the head in that heroes are expensive in faction. You accidentally get to 600,000-700,000 points worth of heroes in Nurgle without really trying. And so that's a consideration, but I agree wholeheartedly with everything you just said there. It's so strong.
So if you were talking to me as like a list builder, are you no, because I want to be battle reg still? Are you, yeah, maybe, depending on like the style of list? Are you, as you said, having 2 spells? And a lot of people don't know this, folks. When you take either a command entourage or a warlord battalion, you don't always have to take a second artifact. You can choose a spell, a prayer. You can take an extra triumph. There's a whole bunch of enhancements you can take instead of just artifact. And this is the first time when I was building my list. I actually have been testing 2 spells on my wizards the whole time until I swapped it out at the very end. And I partially regret not taking 2 spells, because having a faction spell and Blizzard, Hoarfrost, Rupture, having an option in addition to Arcane Bolt, Mystic Shield on each of my wizards, it's so good. I'm a big fan of utility.
Yeah, it's big. It's absolutely big. And that's where the consideration. Sorry, I've just lost track of that. I think that's a really, really important consideration, in that what you're doing with Nurgle now comes back to figuring out a concept, figuring out and I've been playing Mandollies for a while, but not just that. But if you think like deck building games, if you think MMORPGs or MOBAs or whatever, the strongest things, the things that succeed the most, is where there's a clear identity and a clear strategy at play. So if you're playing a Nurgle list that doesn't necessarily need that tempo, or if they're a bit agnostic about whether or not they're going to go first, second, whether or not they're going to cop a double or not, then you open yourself up to not needing to even really think about battle reg. You can go more down the route of your double, and I think that they work in pair 10, and especially, again, I'm going to talk more to Filthbringers in that example, in that you probably go down the route of both, because Filthbringers is going to give you the Entorian Acolytes battalion, and pretty much guarantee that you're going to get your command entourage as well. So it rewards on both fronts, because you're taking 3 wizards. So you just take 2 Entorian Acolytes, you put the third one into the into the command entourage plus whatever hero you bring and whatever heroes you bring, and then you're good to go. So that's a really good consideration at this point.
So I was just rereading the rules for Filthbringers. Add 3 instead of 1 if that wizard is within 3 inches of 2 other wizards. So, like, it's not hard to be getting a +2 on the spell cast, +3 if you really focus on it. So a +3 on your casting, unbinding, and dispelling. Plus, trying to go for some high casting like your Hoarfrost, like your Merciless Blizzard, or anything in your subfaction. Even getting a +2 to unbind is an incredible figure that might unbind the spell without even having to spend a Primal Dice, which then you can reinvest somewhere else, or you can use it for other big spells. It's and that's kind of why I go back to Filthbringers, not because I think this is a season for it, but if there was any time that you want to make the most of 3 wizards running around, there's battle plans that reward you for having Entorian Locusts on it. There are spells and abilities. This is the season, but do I always have to run Filthbringers? No, it's just the example I'm using. It's just obviously you don't get as much spell casting abilities if I take Befouling Host. There's different strategy in play. You probably take one wizard that makes the most of it, so you're probably not taking Entorian Acolytes. But the Wizard Finders of Entor, I have not found a use yet, at least in the armies that I'm running. I'm sure there are some builds, and maybe because I just don't have many monsters that aren't heroes. Do you think Nurgle is someone that could benefit, or would you consider the Wizard Finders, or are you happy with Warlord, Battle Reg, Command Entourage?
Yeah, I don't get Wizard Finders as a sub-faction. I guess if you started to see like Tzeentch being really prevalent or a big problem. But I don't know, it's a weird one. It feels like the definition of a Sex Panther battalion, like 60% of the time it'll work every time, but outside of that, it's just useless and bad. So I'm just a bit lost on that one. And I read it, and then as you were talking about it, I had to reread it. Is probably where because I've forgotten what it does.
If it could be a monster that was a leader, I think different story. I'm like, okay, cool. Now
absolutely,
I could do something with it. But considering it's a non-leader monster, I'm like, I don't have a lot of reasons. And again, I'd rather take something else than that. I just don't find a lot of use at the moment. Like, thinking of the meta, right? OBR not going to help me right now. Korn definitely not going to help me. KO ain't going to help me. Seraphon, I got to crack through those Croxigore or those Skinks or those Saurus warriors before I get into those wizards. And I think once I get into the wizards, like, I don't have a problem with Croaker or Slann. It's just getting through the meat shield to get to that point. But yeah, like Tzeentch, even Lumineth, it doesn't really benefit that much. Like, okay, cool, I can heal one person in the unit that's a wizard. Otherwise, okay.
Like it's a real weird one. And especially because it's attached to melee profiles, it's super easy for your opponent to kite, right? Like, they will just they'll drip feed you anything else in the army anyway. And so by the time you get to that, like, wizard, and most wizards are not hard to drop. Like, Crow could be probably the hardest in the list in the game, and or maybe an Archeon, or if he casts, I'm pretty sure, and then you're like, like this, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze.
Nah, it's definitely a very niche build that it's a problem I don't have to need to solve. Grand strats, without going into the detail of all these, by now people have read them, they know them. Are you taking a grand strategy, or are you enticed by any of these grand strategies, or are you keeping within book? And then why? Whatever your decision is.
No, yeah, good question. I'm staying in faction grand strategy wise at the moment because I think Blessed Desecration is still one of the best grand strats that GW have created because of the way that it works. It's good for play, like in terms of like you're working towards it throughout the game, but it's really about exemplifying what Nurgle's trying to do, which is play for 5 turns, control the battlefield, finish the game controlling a piece of terrain. So it leans into what you're doing anyway. But I do think Overshadow is very, very doable for, it's most builds you're going to have, you're going to be able to preserve a battle line unit, and it leans into, again, what Nurgle's trying to do, which is play 5 turns of the game. And in the course of that, there's a very good chance that you'll be able to punch through all battle line. Unfortunately, Overshadow can also be just denied by your opponent running a unit to the back of the table, which is very, very sad. I don't mind spellcasting Savant either. Just keeping one thing alive gives me the heebies and the jeebies. So
it's tough.
yeah.
I ran it, and it's tough. I'm
Yeah.
running away from fights. I'm hiding where I possibly can hide.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
if you go up against someone who's got a lot of range and they're able to clear the screens out. Obviously, Lookout Sir has changed a little bit, but it is hard. I lost it once, actually. No, I lost it twice. I failed it twice. I was a potato with one of my first game. I had my wizard went and claimed an objective. I was like, a lot of combat's tied up, and then Kato with his 14-inch fly came in and just deleted my general. But it's hard to do. It is really hard to do. But I look at your list. Spread rampant disease, bless desecration, even tend the guard, and I'm like, I kind of like those better than these.
Way better. Like even Tend the Garden, which is one where your opponent can just run something at the end of the game and shut down. It has exactly the same problem that Overshadow does. So it's much of a muchness at that point.
And in that case, you take the sub faction that gets you multiple trees. Like, oh, actually, no, even then, like it's just within a tree that makes it harder. All right, point made. Slaughter of Sorcery is difficult because sometimes you can't get to them. Spellcasting Savant, it's a risk, a high risk, and then Overshadow. If you're taking something, it sounds like Tom, that's the one you would take, but I'm hearing yours are better, likely. But I really enjoyed my battle tactics. I found faction versus Generals Handbook. I was about 50-50. I was always doing at least 2 Generals Handbook, maybe 3 Generals Handbook, and then 2 from my book or 3. I was always like 50-50. What did you find from your experience with Nurgle in the current season?
Exactly the same. I was getting 2 of one and 3 of the other, like 2 book and of book and GHB, 2 and 3, one way or the other every game. Like Nurgle has 3, like for the list I was playing at Bathurst, it has 3 tactics that I can get pretty handily in a game. And whether I got that third one out of the book or the GHB was based on what was happening in the game. There's only 3 tactics that I'm yet to do, which is Reprisal, Endless Exploration, or Magical Mayhem. And I guess like go me, I haven't had my general die. So like over the last, because I've only played Bathurst and one other little event, and Magical Mayhem. That one's always scary because like it's about like kill with a spell, and if you're only casting like 2, maybe 3 spells that do damage in a turn, and your opponent's going to try and unbind all of them. That one, like I'm not running Seraphine, I'm not running Zinch. Like that one seems hard to guarantee. So yes, but outside of that, the rest of them, like the whole set are really, really well balanced, I think. And I think they're doable for pretty much any faction. I like that they're not stand on objective in a certain way, which is what we've seen in the last 18 months worth of GHBs. So yeah, I'm a big fan, and that they're all situational dependent, but common situational dependent.
I'm going to ask you the burning question that I know chat will want me to ask. Turn 1, what are your battle tactics? And there's 2 that stand out for me, and the ones that I ran all the time. But where are you? Like, if you're turn 1ing, what's your go-to options?
Yeah, there's 3 that I turn 1 with in my Drowned Men build, which is Intimidate the Invaders, which I try to keep for later in the game, like because your pre-game move, like typically, even if you get pinned by moving forward, if you've decided to move forward because you're not scared of what your opponent's going to take, you might even be out of your territory at that point, which is kind of cool. So that's probably the least common of the 3. Outside of that, Magical Mayhem, like Nurgle's not really casting spells at your opponent. They're not really casting spells in synergy. So I had a lot of games where I would have Be'lakor stand 30.1 inches away from my opponent's line and cast Mystic Shield on absolutely nobody and get a tactic.
Oh, you mean dominance, right? Magical dominance, which is
Magical
cast one
dominance.
spell.
Sorry,
Yeah, just want to clarify.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
dominance. Yeah, stay outside of 30. Watch out for heroic willpower. Like, make sure no one
Yeah.
else gets a sneaky unbind.
Don't ever pick it against Legion of Night because they're going to heroic action teleport to unbind to be in range.
I just want to show you how big my grapefruits are. I got this off against Corn.
Well done. Well done. Not an easy feat.
No. Look, but they gave it to me first turn. They gave me top of turn 1, so I took it while it was available. So intimidate the invaders, absolutely. Magical dominance, absolutely. What's your third?
It's a Nurgle one called the Droning, which is, especially in a pre-game move world, it's have a different unit of flyers in every quarter of the battlefield. So again, it's a no dice rolling. It's a you can just guarantee it, especially in lists where you're not having to hard commit your alpha. It's not hard to leave 2 units behind, or a Lord of Afflictions and a unit behind, send the rest up the table, and just guarantee that one.
I just want to call out as well, because this caught off a few people I noticed when I've been playing with them. Magical dominance is there's 2 factors. You've got to get a spell off, and you can't fail anything else, or nothing else can be unbound. So a lot of people that I've seen have not read that second part. So like they'll go for a second or third spell cast, and if one of those are unbound, your whole grand strategy's out. So just doing the lowest cast possible. If it happens to be Mystic Shield, do 1 and then give up your whole spell cast for the rest of the turn, because you will lose magical dominance. Just as a friendly reminder. I caught out a few people that surprised them.
For sure, like it's okay to live in a world where you stand by an arcane terrain, dump 2, taking second, dump 2 primal dice into casting an arcane bolt that you don't use, and then just stop casting with your whole army. Like, it's okay.
It's good call on arcane terrain as well. Like, hunt down arcane terrain. Make sure you got a wizard within 1, if that's a possible option for you. Stay outside of 30. Dump all your primal magic dice if you need to. Like, whatever it takes. If you fail that crappy roll, but yeah, very easy one.
Yeah. Sweet.
Cool.
But the rest of them super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all pretty achievable. I've done Reprisal. The only one I haven't done is Endless Expropriation. That's the only one I haven't found, because, funnily enough, I have not faced against. I haven't played against any endless spells. Like, people have taken them, like Gravetide or Geminids, but none of them hit the table. Like, I actually haven't had a chance to get rid of any. I haven't played really many Cronspines lately. Yeah, it's wild. I haven't played many spells.
The Cronspine one's really, really hard now, because if it's being taken, like, it's not 2022 where you're seeing a Cronspine in every other list. It's being taken pretty exclusively in lists that are comboing to level it up and turn it wild anyway. So they're going to deny you the ability to make it wild regardless outside of turn 1, and you're not going to be able to kill it.
Yeah, for anyone who Rupture right now doesn't specifically say that the incarnate has to be an enemy incarnate. So you're seeing people like Zinch just go, cool, I have an incarnate. As long as I keep out of combat with my own people, I'll make it Ruptured. But yeah, I haven't had the chance. I think probably one of my last things I kind of want to get into before we get into your lists, and then I have some questions from chat, is this War Scroll got updated in the Harbinger of Decay, by the way, got updated in the Dawnbringer Book 1. We're not going to talk about the Regiment of Renown, because you can't take it, so it doesn't matter. At least for you guys, it doesn't matter. But the Harbinger of Decay had some interesting changes. Both it lost some things, but also gained some things. And the sentiment that I've been getting right now is it's a cool model, don't get me wrong, but there's a few things that it lost that maybe they missed, that they wish they still had. And I haven't seen it yet in many lists. As a Nurgle expert, when you look at this War Scroll, do you like it? And if you were going to take it, like, what's the type of list that you're running, or what's maybe the units that you want to be using the Harbinger with?
Yeah, the Harbinger is a funny one, isn't he? We got everything that people have been calling out for forever, which is we want a priest. And turns out you don't actually want a priest. It's a weird one. So he's an interesting one. Where the actual, I think the actual biggest sin they committed with this, as far as like it being a viably competitive piece, it went from like 140 odd points with that wound and save profile to 190 points. So what it used to be was basically a discount Lord of Afflictions. Like if you didn't have the points for a 230 point mounted hero that could take the crown of the split on helm and the overpowering stench, you could put it on this guy and you play he's a little control idiot that runs around. He's 190 points now, so he's a 40 point discount as opposed to a 90 point discount. That's quite a significant change. And the rules that he picked up aren't exciting good enough to be be a ubiquitous pickup. His native prayer also just isn't what's drawing you to the card, the war scroll. And I still haven't quite figured out if you want a bell or a scythe, because neither seem particularly synergistic. The bell, like he feels like he's fine if you want to take the regiment or renown in Slaves to Darkness, for example. That feels fine, because there's a lot of synergy there in terms of they're not racking up disease points. So instead you put curse on them. So then I would ask, like, what universal prayers, because that's kind of now what we're dealing with, is that you're paying 190 points for a priest. What prayers are you caring about? Heal, you're getting heals every turn, and army-wide heals every turn, and D3 army heals army-wide single turns in every build, and sometimes every turn in some builds. So then we go, okay, so that's not super duper important. Maybe if you're running you want to run in with the Maggotkin Lords, that'd be cool. So then Curse actually might have some legs even in Nurgle where you're stopping disease. But I'd be doing it in a list that's like running, I've sort of toyed with the idea. I've written a couple lists, which is we're going to run 2 units of Rot My Creed. And so you curse for 1 unit and you don't for the other, sort of thing, which is really hard. And but in terms of those guys with shooting on 6s to wound, do mortals would be really, really, really good. Might be worth a consideration, but I think him into like a mass Rot My Creed army, that would be the only place where I actually would take him. And even then, I'm not sure I would.
And just to clarify something you mentioned, when you say it would stop disease, it's because both disease weapons and curse are triggered on 6s to hit. So you can't get both. It's one or the other. You get to choose. The question is, what do you want to choose? And do you have the volume of attacks to be taking advantage of curse? The challenge with curse is its range of 9. So it's always hard to be within range to pull off curse. I found my best strategy was like my priest wagon in Daughters of Cain with my, cauldrons that wants to be close to combat. But outside of that, pulling off curse is incredibly tough. Because even if you have a teleport, you can't teleport within 9. So you've got to walk up and get within range. And you're right, 190 points. Look, for me, the thing, like obviously, one, having a priest is great. Get rid of some things like Daughters of Cain, Fire Slayers, just to name a few, some of their abilities. But it's the Shudder Blight rule that I really like. But do I need to spend 190 points to get Shudder Blight where I could use Geminids? I could be like, there's other ways that I could be using, do I need that for 200 points, basically?
Take Overpowering Stench, for example, and have it in a much bigger range. Maybe Shudder Blight in a world where you're like super duper scared of OBR. You take him as a second Overpowering Stench piece, but it's a hard one to fight for at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's fair. Like, it's a lovely model. Don't get me wrong. Probably the points are a little bit off. Like, if it went down to like 160, 170, maybe it's a bit more attractive. But nothing screams out. I think if I had the choice, I'm probably going the Plague side. Like, while I like the idea of the bell, the fact that the Shudder Blight has to be within 3 inches makes me think that I need to be a bit more offensive with this. And subtracting 1 is not a lot. Like, it's okay, but it's not huge.
It would have been fine as an every turn rule, and the fact that it's not makes it the bell not worth it in the slightest.
Yeah, the once per game -1 when we used to live in a world where Khorne would half your run and charge, and you've got other spells that can do stuff like that. I guess for me, it's just like, I got other points to spend on. But you have spent your points here, so this is your 5-0 list, and then we'll go to an alternative thinking. Like I know not everyone wants to be Lord of the Flies, but here's what got you 5-0, and I'm probably less worried about the list. I'm more worried about like why did you build it? What's the combinations? And how do you play with it? Because you don't have a lot of models. It's hard to contest objectives because what they're worth the unit of Pascal Blight Lords are worth 4 on objective total per unit, obviously. Other than the Rotmire, you don't have a lot of objective control. So how do you control the board? How do you go 5-0? How do you beat a Slaanesh army that has 88 Blitzbob archers? How do you make the most of this faction, and why is it the time to play with flies?
So you actually answered the question in your question, which was 88 Blitzbob archers. Terrence, wonderful, absolute gem of a human being. Love him. Have played him a couple times before. Love playing against him. And watching him rock up to Sydney Slaughter with his list, I was like, that's literally the benchmark of what you need to beat in order to think about placing in the tournament. From my side of things, I wasn't too cared about. I didn't care too much about the idea of placing, but it was a really interesting thought experiment in terms of like the game in New South Wales has a very clear litmus test of like what the very top end of power curve is in terms of like this is an oppressive threat range list in terms of like you can't really engage with it in most armies before it wipes you out. It's got tremendous output. And it's a list with like no linchpins. Like it's a list where you take killing anything in that list has equal value, which means you have to be able to kill the whole list, sort of thing, in order for it to drop its total efficacy. And the one thing that it does kind of hinge around is the ability to hand out 3 commands. So that was sort of like I walked away from Slaughter being like, I needed a faster list to play. I don't think that this list is output wise or anything like that necessarily better, like stronger than what I was playing, which was a couple of Maggotkin Lords and a single unit of flies, and then the rest was Rotmire Creed and bits and pieces.
Last time I played you, like just to go back really quickly, you had 2 Maggotkin Lords. I remember you had 2 Maggotkin Lords. You had less flies. Like this is not the only list you run. There's a lot of different builds, and it's just fascinating you've landed here because this is a very much like 12, 18 months ago. This was terrorizing the meta. Probably was like early season 1, but now like it's back and. Tell me more.
It's back in POG form. So I wanted a list that could. So I was thinking about that idea of like that and KO can sit back at the table and just then come out and destroy you. So I wanted a list that was a bit faster on pace, so it could move up the board. So that's where you get those guys. And then I wanted a list that could be not engaged with in return. So there's a really fun interaction with this list, which is that you can get the list almost down to a total null deploy in the way that it's currently built. So the Lord of Afflictions can take 2 units of flies up in the sky with him, and Gutrot Spume can take 3 units off the table and ambush them from the side of the table with him. So that means I could get down to, theoretically, like Be'lakor and a unit of +4 Blight Lords before we need to roll dice. They're my only deployments. So in those matchups, this was really, really cool. At Bathurst, I discovered that I played this list 4 or 5 different ways based on matchup. So I think I'm really going to cop a lot of flack for saying like there's a lot of nuance behind playing this list because I think a lot of people will see the +4 Blight Lords and go like it's just pin and win. Unless you're playing into melee armies, very rarely you're going to be allowed to charge their deployment zone and pin them, and that happened. Two games out of 5 at Bathurst where I actually took first and did the charge in and win. What it does really, really well is bait and trapping. So deploy a certain way, let your opponent, and because it's a single drop, like taking a single drop means that you're never reactively deploying consistently. Like it's all going to be based on a die roll against another battle reg if you are going to be able to reactively deploy. So I drop first, watch my opponent do whatever they want to do, figure out like, no, that's actually not something I want to go into turn one, and use my pre-game move to actually back off and just control objectives and force them to come into me. So then I can draw out castles, and I can get them to move their army out of position and then clap back. So that was a component. The other side of it is so there's like modules in here. So you got a lot of Afflictions of the Blightlords. They're like module A. Module B is Bellicor, which is that we're running into a world where big scaries are going to be there, like singular big scaries are going to be around. Guys like Croak, Scarbrand, the boats. So he's just a really good insurance policy. Like if I don't want you to do something for 1 to 2 turns, there you are. It's not a range-based thing. I can literally sit him out of harm's way and lock down. And then if he gets to live around, anything he does from there is gravy, whether it is fighting or dying. Anything he does from there is actually wonderful. And then Gut Rot Spume.
Can I just pause you on Bellicor, right? Because it is not a Nurgle. It's obviously an ally. It's coming in a coalition, whatever. Why is that important? I just want to call this out, right? Like, why is stopping someone doing something important, and why is it something that you are investing 340 points into?
It's the only quote unquote synergy that that I've got in the list in terms of like things doing things to things in order to really have a control over the game. Overpowering Stench shuts down your command abilities, but then Bellicor can shut down an opponent's ability to take like a big piece or a big block and retaliate. Or alternatively, one thing that I don't have in this list is a lot of casting, and we're in the casting meta, and we're in a world where Seraphon is at play, or we're in a world where Tzeentch is going to be quite popular because of the nature of the battle pack. So I look at that and be like, something like a Slann with the ability to it can internally generate the equivalent of a unit of Raptidon charges without blinking an eye in turn. Even more so than Croak, because I can just stay away from Croak unless he wants to teleport him in. And if he wants to teleport him in, he's not going to wipe out my army. I can potentially clap back. But I go, there's a Slann. He's not doing your summoning. I'll take first turn and give you the second and Dark Master him. And a Lizardman army with 2 turns deficit of cosmic power points is probably going to be enough to really slow down their ability to play the game. And so you're dropping that value out of what they're doing. Their value is out of those points as much as it is sending magic missiles your way. So he's a really cool sort of synergy list. And again, it's that idea of I want to think about the big picture, like what could I be playing against and how do I answer those things? Not as much as this list is a big question list. So it's going to gear check in a multitude of ways. And then the last, so that's Bellicor's role in the list. And then on top of that, he's a decent enough fighter. He's a scary enough fighter that you have to commit to killing him. Sometimes he doesn't die, but if my opponent's committing to killing Bellicor, they're not committing to killing the rest of the list. And so he's a good little trading piece in a list that doesn't have a lot of pieces to trade. Because if he dies, it's not the end of the world. In most situations. The last module is that Gut Rot Spume Rot My Creed, and that unit, the Creed, were a game changer for the faction when they got released. They added the ability to poke, which is just send some damage your opponent's way. And so because the list can be quite fast, they can be a little bit outpaced in this particular build. And so I was like, well, how do I counteract that? If my opponent wants to either deploy away from if they can deploy away from where my flies can get to, you're damn skippy they're going to be able to deploy away from where my Creed are going to get to. So I want to be able to counteract that. So I just bring him on from the table edge, and the whole unit can pop out 9 inches away from my opponent and shoot.
Range 12?
14.
15?
14,
yeah.
14 means you can bring them out in sort of like a clump, and they're all in range of the thing at the 9 inches from the front guy. So it means that screening them out is pretty good, because if they take 40 shots, means they're going to put a good amount of damage in. And then they're sitting in this weird position at the side of the table. Your opponent has to come into them, and they're going to unleash hell when they come in. So you kind of get to double dip. They sort of like self-manufacture a double turn because they're not a reliable hitter. Like they hit on 4s natively. So you're allowed to attack them on the turn they come in, and they hit on 5s. But either way, so many shots is just going to be effective. And so, if my opponent goes after this list really does hinge around of like, if my opponent goes after X, Y, or Z, it's fine. Like, they can go after that. They all start to cover each other, and the idea is to smother the board with threats, be able to remove things pretty well, and just play that sort of control game, shut down your opponent's ability to play the game.
Yeah, this particular list does play the control game incredibly well, whether it's, the Be'lakor piece and, you might have that offensive piece that like, right, well, I've kept my Stormcast Dragons or my offensive, whatever my offensive thing is, my Varangard, cool, I'm going to go take out this Lord of Affliction. I'm going to go in and I'm going to go handle it. Cool, I'm going to Be'lakor it. And, there's a good chance that at least one turn, if I double you and I take the top of the turn, or if you win and you give it away, then you've Be'lakored me for two essentially turns. And the ability to score battle tactics or to take over this particular unit or whatever it might be, can be incredibly difficult. You've taken a lead, you've controlled parts of the board, the Lord of Affliction's doing its thing, pinning you, and being able to stop all out attack, all out defense, issuing particular commands that might get you out of trouble, really makes the Lord of Afflictions and the Pascal Blight Laws incredibly durable, let alone when Be'lakor's gone around picking on things. I think you're being pinged off by like your Rotmire Kree, or they're holding objectives and they're doing other things. So you really, while you're light on bodies, you're playing almost like a Sons of Behemoth kind of like controlling the board with limited resources. But what you do incredibly well. And it's tough. If you don't have the right tools, it is tough to handle this.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think the Sons of Behemoth point is a really good comparative in terms of strategy. The difference is that Sons of Behemoth, like the Giants, can come in and they can swing for big damage. Whereas things like the reason why Pascal Blight Lords are so good is they come in and just do consistent amounts of damage all the time. So they've got like the impact hits, they got the fights, they got the swings at the end of the combat, beginning of battle shock, and then you got disease. So they just like this dervish of just like constant little bits of damage, and little bits of damage all the time equals to big amounts of damage.
Yeah. I really like it. And obviously, if you don't want to run as many Blight Lords, cool, you can pull back. Obviously, being under the Drowned Men, you get the pre-game move, or you're coming in from the side of the board. So you're just giving up some of that stuff. You obviously you have no Entorian Locusts here. So certainly you could scale back a little and bring yourself in some different options. But this is a list that went 5-0. It seems like you have all the tools, or at least you have some good tools to be able to handle the current meta. Are there armies that you're worried about playing against this? Like, is there, zombie spam, or how does this fare against OBR, especially? I mean, they've kind of moved a little bit till Null Myriad, which you don't care about, but even like the Crematorium build or whatever. How do you think this would handle with like the top armies at the moment? Well, how is it handling the top armies at the moment?
It's doing fine. I play against a lot of Soul Blight because there's a lot of Soul Blight around, and it's doing pretty well with that. It's doing fine to OBR, doing fine to Slaanesh. The weird one is, and this is more of a local thing, is that one of my really dear mates, Dan, he lives rent free in my head for IDK. It's just a faction where they just have the right things to deal with this sometimes when played well. That's been it, like so far, which is a weird one. And I think that comes from the idea that the things like they're incredibly, they're faster than I am. Things like Strike First can be really, really powerful. All that sort of jazz. It when played well, it matches this as far as tempo is concerned. So that's been a weird learning curve. I've not struggled too hard into the big bads. It's the weird lower down the totem pole, less seen things that can catch me out.
If I was a betting man, I would never have picked IDK as the one that would kind of live rent free in your head.
Yep.
I think the one thing I'll call out before we move on to the other list, and the secret sauce that I really appreciate, is the combination of the battle regiment with the drowned men, with obviously what you said around the gut rot and the Lord of Affliction. You
Mm.
are one drop, so you're going to mostly know who goes first. I'm finding people are scaling back from battle regiment at the moment, and they're either going Warlord, Entorian, Magnificent. They're going kind of 4 drops at least. So you're going to have a good chance of controlling the tempo early. You then have the ability to deploy off the board, or you get the ability to move up the board before in a pre-game move, and then you have some repositioning. So from like I guarantee myself turn 1 and I get to do my thing. You almost get to execute a plan in turn 1 that puts your opponent on the back foot immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where I would argue that like single drop battle reg has to be purposeful. It's not just, whether it's, it's a game strategy, you're taking that, or things like my army really can't handle being doubled by XYZ type lists. So I'm taking a battle reg to guarantee that that doesn't happen. You need to have a reason for it. I think we might be a little bit past the point of like, you just take it because it's the best thing in the game.
Yeah, it is very good. But you also been playing around with some other lists, and I know we've been talking about Filthbringers, and there's no surprise that you have put an example here of a Filthbringers list, and you've got some of the common traits from what you've had. You've still got the Lord of Affliction. It's a great unit. Even if I wasn't building into flies, I feel like it's a great piece that does control the board a lot. You have got probably a little bit less Blight Lords here. You've got 3 units of 2 Blight Lords, the Pascal Blight Lords. You've still got your 20 Rotmire Creed. You brought yourself the Suffocating Grave Tide. You've got Blowout Rot Spawn. And you've got your 3 Rotbringer Sorcerers who have replaced like your Bellacore and who was the other guy? Was it Gut Rot Spume? Who was the other?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've switched up and moved a few things around, but you've kept your similar core. You've got your battle reg, and you've got command entourage. So how does this list differ, and what's it doing that the other one couldn't?
So whilst there are still flies, this list plays completely differently to how the list I took to Bathurst does. I'm seriously thinking about bringing this to GT. It's so fun to play. Like just in terms of like, I just want to play 5 really, really fun games. This list is mega fun to play. The way that it plays differently is that it's very much a castle build. Like the fastest things in the list are only speed 8. Not that fast in the context of the game. So they're very good at like sort of getting to the edge, sort of sitting on the edge of a zone and then just being able to consistently threat anything that's in the zone, which is actually kind of like what I think threat range game. Like I like that sort of threat range game. Like, the game is about fighting over circles. So this list is a bit more castle-y. Like, you've got my creator deploying on the table in every game. Even though you've got the 3 units of Blight Lords, the reason why they're in the list, and it's not because I'm totally addicted to flies. It's actually a battle line problem that Nurgle has, and I've touched on it before, which is that sub-factions are how you unlock battle line in Nurgle, as opposed to characters, or just that you have a range of battle line options. So you've got Blight Kings or you've got Plague Bearers. You can unlock Blight Lords by taking a Lord of Afflictions as your battle line. Otherwise, you're having to play in a totally different sub-faction. So you get, for example, you get Rotmire Creed in Blessed Suns. You get Plague Drones in Droning Guard. Beast of Nurgle in Befouling Host. So this list has been built up, not necessarily that because you have to take Blight Lords, but just that and not because I think that Blight Lords are what you need to play. The reason why I play them is because they're speed 8, not speed 4. I find speed 4 so frustrating to play with. Why I'm playing Nurgle as a faction, I don't know. As a result of that, but so the unit composition is built on that. They're really consistent. That everyone should respect. The fly, as far as their output's concerned. But what the list is actually trying to do is create like sort of it's as opposed to like what can be individual modules, like there's target saturation that can be anywhere on the board sort of thing, which is what the last list was doing. This is trying to deathball. It's built around the idea that everything sort of stays in like this blob, and it pivots. It moves up, it picks a direction it's going to move, and it sort of moves in that direction. It figures out what way it wants to cover scenario, and it covers that scenario. And it's all sort of about not layering synergy, but layering like output. So your Rotmire are going to be like, quote unquote screen. They're going to sit there, but they've also got output, like they are going to shoot. But like I was saying before, what I love about shooting in this game is that it's sort of like a self-manufactured double turn. If you want to deal with Rotmire and you want to fight them, they get to shoot you again. And then even if you like wipe them out, you're now, which is not easy to do. Like people really underestimate how easy it is to kill Rotmire Creed. It's not easy. They've still got a 5-up ward. There's 22 wounds in a unit. And what I will do in most games is I'm going to be like, you come in and kill them, no dramas. I'll remove them so that they're not engaged anymore and start moving them away and rallying the crap out of them. Because if you kill, like, I think and a really good example is like the game that you and I played at Dice like a little while back, which is you came with Drag, you blitz the unit. There's like 3 guys remaining. I was like, response is they're not touching the game for the rest. Like they're not touching anybody for the rest of the game. They're walking away, and it's going to rally them for 4 more turns, and they get back to decent numbers. And then you start building that output again. So you do that, and then you got your flies and blowout sort of sitting there. And so this list is, in contrast with the other one, it is actually built around how it can output. So blowout is actually really, like the Maggotkin are really good heavy hitters. Like they got the high end, high damage attacks, which you don't see anywhere else in the faction really. And then you got the wizards. So if you want to send a swarm into me, that's cool. This list has no problems handling swarms. Every wizard has rancid visitations, which if you don't know what it is a range 7 spell. It casts on a 7, so it's pretty easy to get off. And even though it's range 7, it targets a unit. You roll a dice for every model in the unit, and on a 2+, you do a mortal wound. It's the strongest horde clearing spell in the game. And so you've got that, and you've got Merciless Blizzard. So every wizard knows Rancid Visitations, and then 2 will know Merciless Blizzard. So it's just a case of like the clapback is strong because that clapback can happen, and you got the Gravetide as well. Because that clapback is happening in the hero phase, the army can unjam itself really, really well. So like I said, it's about layering and unpacking your own output as the game progresses and moving that death ball around as you do it.
Yeah, no, I like it. And the fact that, and this is what I found with my gits when I was running like Blizzard, I had a couple of other offensive spells, and it makes it hard to understand where my power dice go and which is the one that I want to stop. Is it Scrag Rots, Mortal Wounds for, every dice after 3+? Is it Merciless Blizzard? Is it Hoarfrost? Is it X? Is it Y? Is it the Hand of Gork that leads into Merciless Blizzard? Like there's so many choices. And when you start making your opponent make tough choices, and you're like, cool, you shut down Merciless Blizzard, no problem. I've still got Rancid Visitation. I've still got this. And you've got utility and you've got a lot of value there. But what I do want to talk about before we get into some like wrap-up questions is Suffocating Gravetide is something we don't really see very often. At least it hasn't historically seen play. So why is it that you would spend the 30 points for that versus guaranteeing yourself a triumph, or maybe spending the extra 30 points you've got spare in order to get is Jaw 60 or 70? Like, yeah, something that's 50, 60 points, like why this one?
So good reasons. There's 2 or 3. Big one is that the Rotbringer sorcerers have a special rule which corrupt the endless spells. So while that endless spell is on the table, for all intents and purposes, it's a Nurgle unit, which means that it goes out and it causes disease to happen elsewhere. And once the disease clock starts, unless you can heal it off, it's just like little bits of chip damage. Disease is a weird mechanic, and in terms of like you can build into it, but it's always there if you don't. So that's like that's a reason. The other reason is that it is really big base size. So if your opponent has options for dealing with it once you get it off, they can either try and unbind it. Awesome. That's not a spell. That's a spell they're not casting. And like I was saying before, this list is very much designed, like it's got good casting, but it's very much designed to just pull apart your opponent's spell casting in return. Like it's got good unbinds. And something like a Gravetide means they have to commit to binding it, otherwise it's going to do what it does. And then the third reason, which is why the reason you take it. It's got really good damage output, especially against large units. So it moves over a unit, roll dice equal to that unit, and on a 5+, you do mortal wounds. And so that particular ability, like the way that does damage, all the Rotbringer sorcerers have exactly the same spell at range 14. So you can just start absolutely carpet bombing armies that are taking lots of units with these spells and just really thinning them out. So whilst there are other ones that I'd say are quote unquote more powerful, for the purpose of this list, I don't need Geminids. I've got the Lord of Afflictions and Raw to shut down command points. Maelstrom, I'm probably just not casting enough to get the value out of it. Jaws it's just an expensive boy. And the Gravetide moves really far. You cast it at 8, I think it then moves 12. So it gets up in people's faces. So it was it just sort of felt like the total package for me. And I've found that every time I've used it.
And it's the price for me it's the driving factor. Like I was in this situation where do I take Geminids? Do I take Quicksilver Swords? Do I take all these different options? And they're all fitting 50, 60, 70 points. And I'm like, I would rather the Triumph. I'd rather +1 to wound, inspiring presence essentially, and just shutting down my opponent getting the Triumph. So for me, most of those endless spells were too high. But Suffocating Gravetide at 30 points, and to your point, when it's cast by a Rotbringer sorcerer, and I know people talked about Shackles as another good example of having 3 particular points of the field, and that would cause disease tokens. 30 points is nothing, and you've got a good chance it's still at 1970 to get yourself the Triumph, or at least deny your opponent the Triumph. And some armies really need that Triumph.
Yeah, and I'm looking at you, Gits, in terms of armies that need Triumph. So it's sort of once and this was I'm going to pretend like I thought about all this, but the other side of it is that by denying that Triumph, it almost then replicates the effect of a Horfrost as well on top of that, because you can shut down command abilities in faction anyway, and then Triumph for Indomitable is a way of getting around blocking command points. So it's just layering in what you're abusing of your opponent.
Yeah, my son's always wants the +1 to wound. So getting the difference of getting the +1 to wound and not getting the +1 to wound at a critical time is so important. That's just one of many examples. While you were talking, I was refreshing myself on Plague Bearers. I'm like, yep, they suffer the same fate as Demonettes. You look at it and it's such an underwhelming battle line. Great, you get 1 attack each, hit on 4s, wound on 3s, no rend for 1 damage. I wouldn't even Horfrost that unit because, you could go rend 3 or hit on 2s or wound on 2s, but it's still eh. And you can get the what's the spell where you add extra wound to it? You've got the there's 2 versions. There's 2 versions. You've got the
Glockin version for mortals. Yeah.
I'm other than turning it into a 3 wound tar pit, and now that there's no bounty hunters, maybe that's why I bring in Plague Bearers. They did get a points discount as well. They're now sitting at 110, I think it is. So it's not too. Are they 130?
They're still 130, yeah. So
I thought they discounted.
So they were 150.
Oh, so, they went. I thought they lost 20 points. It went from 130 to 110. I'm like,
I'd love to live in that world.
If they were 110, I'm like, that's not so bad. But 130, I'm like, now I understand and appreciate and am reminded why unlocking different battle line options is the better probably play at the moment.
Yeah, it's where I still like Plague Bearers. They have a role, they have a very distinct role, which is nothing to do with output. It's to do with the fact that they're 20 wounds and randomly bring themselves back. And that combos that wombo combos really nicely with the Sloppity Bilepiper. Why don't and I was running that I ran that at Slaughter as part of the base list because I wanted a champion and I had the points left over for another unit, and I was like, this synergizes. This is actually a really nice little bit of synergy. But it's speed 4, so I haven't been playing the game long enough to have seen what Nurgle were like before, but I understand they used to be a little bit faster. In a world where they're a little bit faster.
That is an understatement. That was an understatement. Sure. Old Nurgle could get into combat in turn 1 because you would have a Feculent Narmor in the middle of the board. If you started your charge within 7 inches, you could run and charge. So you would just run up the board, get within 7, slingshot yourself into your opponent. It was the stupidest thing in the world. But yeah, a lot of Nurgle people are a little bit sad when that transitioned. There was a lot of angry comments. There was a lot of angry comments I got.
That seems silly. And I would say that of all the units in the world, like to get something like a hero phase move ability or just a speed buff, something like, I think Plague Bearers are sort of the inoffensive version of that, because their job is to just get into combat and then just be not piled in upon for the rest of the game. Like, they're just there to not die. But at 130 points and then needing to bring a hero to do that, I'm not that keen.
I feel like that unit is competing in a very similar role to Nurglings and Beasts of Nurgle, where if I want to pin my opponent down, I don't care about the damage output, but I'm just going to grind and slow down my opponent, whether you got Sloppity or no Sloppity. There's 3 units that are basically doing the same thing, just in different ways. And I'm probably either going for the Nurglings with their deep strike ability from a terrain piece, or I'm going the Beasts of Nurgle because of the speed.
The speed and the mortal wounds output. The only thing that those 2 units don't have going for them is the battle line keyword.
Yeah.
And that's it's where the books are in a really strange place. And at some point, I'm assuming, the book will get a new book. I'd be very interested to see how they handle that, because I think that's been a limiting factor the whole way through. Is you see flies because they're the easiest battle line to unlock in faction in every sub faction, and they're, as a result, the best.
Yeah. Yeah, I think GW's learnt a lot after Nurgle. So like Nurgle was the turning point. You look at how they wrote Stormcast, Orcs, even I think Skaven was before you. Those I think Daughters as well. Like I think they've learnt a lot about about writing battle tomes for the 3rd edition. You guys started cracking the code, but you look at the difference between a battle tome today versus a battle tome then. They're chalk and cheese. So I imagine there will be a lot of opportunity. But yeah, so I've got a couple rapid fire questions for you coming from the Discord server. Are you ready? Are you ready for like hard fire questions?
I was born ready. I hope the listeners and viewers are ready for some sweet hot takes, because that's about all I'm going to be good for.
All right, Big Bobo asking, does the Glotkin have a place in a more elite mortal list?
Hell yes, it does. I am the biggest fan. That was the model that got me into Nurgle, both aesthetically and rules wise. It's so close to being like, if you like, to the point where, like, if I think about Nurgle, these are the lists that my opponent would bring. It is so close to being in that category. And in the hand, and it's probably one of the best examples of a model in the game that is like a demonstrator of like skill expression. I know Emma over in the States has done well with it recently. When I first jumped on the scene, I played it at like events for about 6 months, and was doing pretty okay with it. So I'm a big fan. The second that either it goes down a bit more or Blight Kings go down to where I think they should be, it will just be played a lot because it's super fun to play.
So Glotkin went down 50 points recently. It's still not, from what I'm hearing, it's not enough for you. What's the price point that you think the current War Scroll is fair value?
Yeah, so it started at like 700 when the book first came out. Way too expensive. I was playing it at that point, and I guess the game hadn't, like, there were less things in the game that could deal with it at that point. If you played it well, it was fine. But it's dropped down to 550 over the course of the last 18 months. And even then, I'd say it needs to be around like the 520. The disgusting apologist in me is going to say 500, but 520 is probably where you want to see it. And then it's like at that point a little bit more than a Great Unclaimed One, which I don't think are worth taking at the moment because of speed 4, even though this is certainly speed 5. But the Blight Krieg ability, the 2-cast wizard, and the fact that it's a pretty decent output model, and it's got the control because it's got this like rule where you have to run away from it or take damage. Sorry, I'm just going to keep saying ands for it. And it's got like a monstrous rampage that just causes 5 mortal wounds.
Yeah, that monstrous rampage. That monstrous rampage is money. So it's a great piece. I think 550 is fair.
It's fair.
I can appreciate why 520, 530 would make it feel good. I think to your point as well, like what's happening to like your Blight Kings and other things around it. But I think definitely like its points were set way too high, and I think it's definitely worth considering again. It's probably close.
Yeah.
Sprog McJob saying, and we talked a little bit earlier already about Be'lakor, so it's kind of tying into this with around allies. So we know Be'lakor, Cockatrice, Varangard are good options for allies for Nurgle. Are there any others that kind of like bring curiosity to you, or anything that you might be worth considering or have tested that you like?
Absolutely. There's a lot of allies that I would consider bringing in. The especially now with the like recent points changes, the Slaves to Darkness Demon Prince is a really interesting pick because it has a heroic action. I think it's a heroic action that shuts off wards while within 3 inches of it. So at 150 points, it's a tanky little dude and shuts wards off for the rest of your army. Makes your output really, really, really good. So he's a cool little one. The other one that I've thought about a lot heading into this edition, and then I haven't done a lot of experimentation with it, but I do think it's going to be there's two models for the same reason. Is the Infernal and Rapturous and the Cygor,
Yes.
because they're just cool little magic control pieces that are so independent of the rest of your army. The Cygor, especially because it's a monster, is pretty handy for things like Gits, Ironeth, all that sort of stuff, because it also puts a piece on the table that could just straight up deny their grand strategy if it gets near their terrain piece. And so it's then becomes a focus of effort and stuff like that for your opponent's output. So I think those are really good. The ones you said before, like I think Be'lakor is just the best ally in faction. Most of the Slaves to Darkness are really, really good. I was playing with Corvus Cabal. I took them to Sydney GT. They're so cheap for what they do, which is just they're a teleport, they're a deep strike scenario unit that can't be shot while in cover. So like you can land some pretty golden opportunities for them to just be nine bodies on a thing. So they're all really, really, really good. Cockatrice, absolutely. I think those are the ones that you're going to focus on, like Chaos Warband, so Undivided, Corvus Cabal, the monsters, Be'lakor, Cygor, and then heroes and units like the Rapturous and the Varangard.
Yeah, all good choices. And obviously, you could get some Clan Pestilence if you want to bring some Plague Monks in, or maybe you get you could bring some cheap. Well, no, they're Plague Priests, they're not even wizards, so you can't even jump through that. No, there's a couple of good options if you want to go into it. But yeah, I think you called out the ones that I would have called out.
I
But I
would
think
love for the next book to have Clan Pestilence as a sort of like a dual book unit, because I've played Skaven in fantasy and I played Pestilence in fantasy, so I would love to see that come back.
well, it's interesting because, like, if you look at the way the game's going, you're losing a lot of coalition. So, makes me wonder: will you still see coalition in Chaos?
So.
Because Chaos seems like the last bastion of coalition. So, yeah, like, is it just going to stick to allies? But there's obviously a cool lot of options. I think the challenge is your things just cost a lot of points. So, do you have the points to invest to begin with? Cool. That question. What else? There's a couple of other final questions. So, no, I'll say that one to the end. Ryan, aka Pizza, saying, how would you recommend tackling the top of the current meta? Any tech for fighting the best armies specifically? And obviously, this is a challenging one because how those top 5 armies are playing right now all have different keys to the kingdom, and no silver bullet sits in your battle tome to handle. Obviously, actually, there's probably there's one unit that probably is closest to the silver bullet, and that's that Lord of Affliction. But any advice or any tech that might help you with some of these big bads of the meta?
Yeah, I think that I think Lord of Afflictions solves a lot of problems. I think Be'lakor solves a lot of problems. So like those are two pieces. Like there's a reason why I'm reaching for those two pieces. As far as the idea of tackling top of the meta, it's as much understanding what they do as it is what you're bringing to the table. And you can bring the best list in the world, and if you don't understand what your opponent's trying to do and how to beat it, you're going to lose that game most of the times, especially if it's if you're playing something like Nurgle with, it's absolutely very true 44% win rate, which I'm very dubious about, versus like, a 70% faction, which again, dubious about. But if you don't understand what your opponent's trying to do, you'll get caught out, you'll lose. So what I would be recommending doing is don't shy away from those games and be ready to stick with something, stick with a faction for a decent while, because I think what again, I'm doing some hot takes here, but I think what the last 12 months have really encouraged players to do is to move away from the idea of like jumping from faction to faction to faction to faction all the time. The 6-month GHB has really, for me, reinforced the need to do deep dive into a faction, because if things are rapidly changing all the time, faction mastery is really, really important. So I think those are two really, really important parts of it. The other part of it, and this is a really hard one for players, especially because this hobby is it's not like Magic the Gathering. Like, you can't just go and like bin a card and swap one out. Buying building painting models takes a lot of time, and you get really attached to them. But I think being able to kill your darlings is really, really important as well. If you're playing a list and you're playing a grand clean one and it's not getting what you need to do, be ready to drop it. You can still have that model. Like, it doesn't change how much you love that model. Like, you're not cheating on it. But it doesn't have to be on the table in every game you play if you're wanting to do better against the things that are beating it. So I think those are really, really important considerations.
Yeah, no, good call. I know when I was running Stormcast, I got into it for dragons, and I love dragons, but at the end of the day, they're a big point sink. They didn't give you a lot of tools outside of the dragons when you're spending so many points on these models. You scale that back and bring some Fulminators or some equivalent of a Dracoline, and you get more bang for your buck for your points. So as much as I love my dragons, like, I could run my dragons and think, right, I'm gonna do the best I can with what I've got. Or if I really do want to go well and defeat those, I'm going to have to maybe make that decision, that hard decision, to leave the dragons at home and bring something that's going to get me a better bang for buck. So it's a good comment. And especially, like, people do jump factions, and like when they run an army for the first time and it doesn't do well, they lose and they start gutting their army quickly. Often, as you said, it's just the wrong decision. And maybe you did a critical thing where you gave the turn away, or you took it, or and I think you and I were talking about this over dinner one day. It's about starting list construction at your battle tactics, not what's going to do the most killing, and thinking about what's going to score you turn one, and what are your options, and do you have the tools to score battle tactics. That's critical. If you come up against Khorne, and Khorne is going to do magical dominance and stop you from doing magical dominance, what's your first turn one battle tactic? Because otherwise, you're already going to be down before you've even like had a turn. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, and this game's about playing turns ahead. Sorry, that's the only thing I like there.
No, yeah, 100%. You're playing turns ahead. Agreed. And that's why you see good players are willing to give away the turn, because they've set themselves up. But you know what? I'm actually kind of okay if you win the priority roll, or if you take it. I'm pretty confident because I've set myself up not just for this turn, but defensively as well for the following turns. I've got the right buffs on, and yada yada yada. Toro Black saying, do mixed demon mortal lists have a place, or do you think it's better to focus on one or the other?
Mixed demon and mortal units, yeah, they absolutely do. The faction all works together pretty well. Are all made equal? Absolutely not. So there are really good demon units to splash in, and the two that spring to mind are Plague Drones, which I'd love to see as battle line. Like, if you're gonna make any of the demons battle line, that would be, or any other unit battle line, that would be my unit. The Plague Drones are this really cool like toolbox unit. They blend really well with the models, and the models blend really well into the demons, right? So like, yeah, you absolutely have a way to do both those things. But again, it's about figuring out the right balance for you and what you need to play against and what you're wanting to achieve.
The second last question, average Stonehorn enjoyer saying, from an opponent's perspective, I swear this wasn't from me, this is from somebody else. How would you tackle a Nurgle list, and what do you target first when you play against them? So you're giving the enemy a little bit of a secret. And I think if I summarize what Tom's already said, I think the answer is you don't have one linchpin. Like you kill his Lord of Affliction, you got lots of tools. But like, what's the thing that if I'm going to try to take you down, Tom, or a Nurgle list in general, do you find that there are linchpins that will start to unravel the list?
Yes and no, that answer exists in every game that Nurgle plays. In that individual pieces, unless you're playing something like a Glotkin, individual pieces aren't necessarily the important part. It's actually unpacking and unraveling the army as a whole. Where Nurgle will fall apart, like I said, the output's not that good, is where you can overwhelm them. And because they're trying to do exactly that to you. A good Nurgle list will it plays like a disease. They nailed flavor in this book wonderfully. In that it's trying to suffocate you, it's trying to stop you from being able to play the game. If you can do that to your opponent, if you can do that to the Nurgle player, they're probably going to struggle to dig themselves out. The flip side of that is something like so. So in Warhammer Hordes we had a term called shoveling, which is like because the game played with a very definite way of winning the game, you could be down, and then have the ability to just figure out a way to linchpin, like remove your way out of the game. Nurgle doesn't have and some factions in this game really do. Things like KO. I played a really amazing game against Christian a few weeks ago, and watched him just pull out 4 battle tactics with a single boat after losing 2 before I really had taken any losses. KO can do that. Sylvaneth can do that. Nurgle doesn't do that very well. The one exception that I'd say is something like the Rockbringers, the Filthbringers list is actually quite good at doing that. Like I said, those wizards are like your late game closers.
Keep going. Sorry.
No. That's my advice in playing this Nurgle.
So let me share what I think, and then you tell me how if I'm right or if I'm completely off the mark. I think some lists have a linchpin. So a perfect example is that traditional build where you see the sloppity piper at the back stopping people from piling in, and there's a clear linchpin there. You remove that sloppity or you remove the demon, like there's things that you can unlock, right? But a lot of the time, Nurgle is pretty independent. So if I'm thinking about how do I defeat Nurgle, I always think about them like a death army. You can't split your attacks. You can't just go 1 for 1. You've got to commit because, those Blight Kings, those the Pascal Blight Lords, whatever the unit is, because of the 5-up ward, because of the healing, because of all the other things, they are tougher than they seem. So, and all it takes, as you said with the Rotmire Coven, you can keep 2 or 3 of those idiots around, you'll grow them back. So, you've really got to commit to killing the unit as opposed to trying to take on multiple units at the same time. And yeah, you chip away, but you don't actually delete the unit. And that's how I found the most success against Nurgle.
You're absolutely correct, and completely agree with that. And something like a unit like the Blight Lords is a great example of kill 1 unit at a time. And I've had this happen in so many games where somebody's chipped across, they've managed to kill a fly out of a unit, that unit retreats, and then and because of the way that it works, I just rally for 2 turns, get the 6, get a Blight Lord back, and I'm back to good. So you don't the army doesn't care about chip damage. It heals so much. It's so tanky. Kill 1 thing at a time.
Yeah. Final question that I know you're going to love.
Cool.
Manfred Mortark saying,
I love the name already.
Yeah, oh, mate, there's so many Mortarks I skipped, right? So Ryan Pizza is the Mortark of disease. You had Big Bobo, the Mortark of the Maw. Everyone's a Mortark in my Discord, it seems. But Manfred is saying, what's the secret to painting your Nurgle army to look repulsive?
Yes. So many different ways. I think it's trying to figure out what you want to do with the army. Painting armies, that's a very, very big cerebral question. I painted my army very differently, I think, to how a lot of people approach Nurgle, which is coming out of my last game. I really want to learn how to do things like non-metallic metals really well. So this army is painted at a baseline, very clean, very very layer centric, very dark to light, high, shading, glazing, whatever you call it. But where it gets real nurgly is figuring out how you make the nurgly things look nurgly. So figuring out, I'm a big fan of things like if you see saws and stuff, figuring out how to make them look really gross. So very simple ways to do this are things like the contrast paints from GW, the Blood for the Blood God one, the red contrast paint is like one of the sickest blood effects you can get because it just sits so heavily. The color is so intense, and you can just streak it out to look like blood's running out of things really, really beautifully. Things like sores and boils, if you want, like if we're talking about color theory side of things, is to like base layer red, highlight pink, highlight yellow, to really get that color to pop and make it really, really gross. But Nurgle's quite a forgiving army to paint in that respect, in that you don't have to be the neatest painter in the world to make it look spot on. And figuring out what effects you want to throw in there is half the fun. It's a bit like just playing with paint as opposed to painting.
And that's probably one of the things I enjoy the most about Nurgle is that it is very forgiving, and it's great for a new player because you can slop on colors, you can play with it, and it doesn't look off. But because again, you can just put blood effects, or you can use pus, and you get these little green, there's green equivalent of I think there's a whole bunch of different like types of things like that. You can play around with a bit of resin or a bit of goop and make some disgusting looking things. And you've got the rust effects as well, which look awesome on the weapons, and corrosion, and it does allow you to play with certain things. While if I did that on my Stormcast or my daughters, I don't play with rust, I don't play with corrosion. I play with blood, but I don't play with any other effects. And I think it gives you a palette of cool things you can do.
And those effects are a really good way to get your color out on models. So things like using turquoises in your rusts can make like a model just really pop, or like like an orange in your rusts make a model really pop. So just play with it. Just have heaps of fun with it.
Tom, this has been awesome. Any shout outs, anything that I want to get your either your Twitter/X, or if you got an Instagram, I would highly recommend checking out. Again, Tom not only is a great player, but an incredible painter, an award winner. Any shout outs, and where can people find you if they want to talk Nurgle?
Plenty of shout outs. I'll keep it quick, I promise. So the Dice Arcade crew in Sydney, just one of the most wonderful, positive, friendly gaming groups I've ever come across in my life, and I hope that's something that we get to keep doing for a very, very long time. I'd like to shout out my regular playing opponents. That we've got the Gribbly game happening, and there's some cool swag and stuff, and not just for their stuff, but there's a couple of other groups that are there. I like just AOS is just like the whole community has just been really, really wonderful. So just keep doing what you're doing, people. If you want to find me, my Twitter is or X is just Thomas Oliver. I've got like the @ is really long and I can't remember what it is, but if you just look Thomas Oliver,
I'll add it. I'll add the details in the description to make your life easy.
And my Instagram is @TomoPaints.
I highly recommend checking it out, and it's really cool. Tom, it's incredible. Thank you so much. Make sure to submit your list for Sydney GT in a couple of weeks' time. I look forward to seeing you as a player finally. 12 months ago, you were just a humble little observer. You've taken the world on for Storm. It's so late now. I'm losing my words. No, not at all. I'm just so out of touch. No, look, it was an absolutely great discussion. Just to clarify, we didn't talk about certain units, and that's fine. It's not like every unit is bad. We're not saying it's bad. It's that right now in the competitive landscape, these are the tools that Tom is finding. But if you are finding something else, maybe you are finding some successes with your Magath Lords, or maybe you think that Tom's thoughts on the Guo is too expensive, and you're a big fan of the Rodigus with the bell, and you got some list tech that maybe we're not thinking about. Let us know in the comment section. And I have the most incredible active Discord, over 8,000 Age of Sigmar players, subsection for Nurgle players. Come talk list tech and design. We all learn together, and that's how we find new things and we challenge our thoughts. And Tom, As always, you're incredible. Thank you so much. And you can hear I'm sick too. Apologies if I sound really nasally and sick. I've been sick all week, but this is feeling me hyped up. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Tom. And I hope you enjoyed this discussion. We'll have plenty more over the coming weeks. See you, everybody. Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you pressed like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AOS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a double one on a spellcast.